Ollie joining us out of Berlin. Ollie, what is your assessment of what we've been hearing from China? Not a big surprise that they come through with some form of retaliation, but it's the type of retaliation that they've reached for.
Yeah, Tom, there were some early whispers about this, kind of some rumored reporting within Chinese media. You know, the moment the EV tariffs dropped, we started to get sort of certain rumblings on potentially the pork market would be something that they would look at. And it appears that sort of in retaliation, this is sort of the lever that they are looking to pull. As you can see, I mean, I'm more sort of comfortable on this sort of terrain of EV markets, but I've just been reliably informed that apparently they import 1.55 million tons of pork last year, about half of which came from the EU, with Spain as the sort of largest supplier there. So, you know, again, these are all just sort of incremental little bits and pieces, and, you know, we'll go to the market action. I've been pulled up Lean Hogs, which I discover only opens at 9:30 New York time, so I'm sure you'll be looking at the futures for that when it opens up. But really, it's sort of, what is the takeaway here? The takeaway here is that you have this opening salvo by the EU on the EVs. Now we're looking at retaliation, and really the question is this just the beginning? Are we in the foothills of what is effectively going to become slowly a trade war? And this is the big question for a lot of people. And as sort of each of the different blocks erect trade barriers to try to prevent some of these sort of cheaper items from coming in, what I think the EU needs to worry the most about is how much faster the United States can move on those, how much slower the EU is, and as a consequence, how much slower and how much more of a target the EU market is for a lot of these Chinese exports.
Well, Ollie, when we tend to see this kind of retaliation, if you will, in terms of EVs and now pork, what's the next step? Is there another sector we should be watching on either side?
Well, listen, I think as you guys have been mentioning, again, when we look at sort of the sectors that are vulnerable to the Europeans, a lot of it comes down to this sort of luxury trade. I mean, even within EVs, right, a lot of the European companies have joint ventures within China that are sort of within the trade wall of China. What is not within the wall of Chinese trade are the really, really most expensive cars. Like, for example, Mercedes-Benz, they make their Maybachs in Stuttgart, right? And these are the ones that they ship from Europe into China. When the trade barriers comes up, it starts to hit that. So I think for the sort of auto sector, I know this because I was speaking to sort of senior members of these companies last week when all of this came out. What they're really looking at right now is their global manufacturing footprint. And I think that for the EV sector, as you take a step back, if they need to start producing more and more cars locally, that is also going to pull out a lot of different models from the market. So this will have sort of huge repercussions, certainly for the auto industry. But if you start to see this trickling into other industries, you're going to see that dynamic play out across a lot of different products.
Are these the same sectors, do we think, Ollie, that Europe is worried about when it comes to potential Trump tariffs as well? Say the Republicans were to win in November, similar sort of areas in the past were hit by Trump, and I'm wondering whether or not we could have the potential sort of double effect of China hitting them and also the United States hitting them. This, as we think about kind of what has supported European stock markets over the last few years. Yes, it's been Novo Nordisk, yes, it's been the healthcare sector, but luxury has been the area you could argue that has really outperformed. Seems like an obvious target.
Yeah, and completely, Guy. And this is sort of goes at the heart of a much bigger and more existential question for Europe, right? So there is the question of the stuff that they export and that they send out to the rest of the world. Obviously, Trump coming in is a bit of a wild card. He's talked about just throwing up tariffs kind of willy-nilly. And this would obviously have an impact here on Europe. But I think what it brings into the fore, Guy, which is not just about the exports, but it's about European competitiveness. And you guys have been talking about it earlier in the show. This is what Mario Draghi has been squarely focused on. And within these sort of discussions, even at the sort of highest level of the sort of EU kind of technocrats like Mario Draghi, basically openly advocating for subsidies and tariffs, not sort of excessive, but to basically level a playing field where you're seeing basically these three major blocks of the world, China, United States, and Europe, fragmenting and just sort of going for their own sort of personal competition. Now, if you throw in sort of more tension between Europe and the United States, that makes the conversation about European competitiveness all the more urgent, one that is frankly such a slow burn that policymakers in Europe, I think, really challenge to make the very difficult decisions that are required to keep Europe competitive.